All right, hello and welcome to Shrinking Classics. Today we're going to be talking about the old classic, The Hobbit, and a little bit that I want to take from The Hobbit is that I hope that someday if 13 dwarves and a wizard stumble into my life and expect a meal, I hope I can be as good of a host as Bilbo and as venturous too.
Hi, I'm your co-host, Leslie, and my takeaway from The Hobbit is that I hope I have Bilbo's courage when I get myself in a situation and find myself thinking, what have I done? Oh,
Yes,
what have I
absolutely.
done?
Right, and well, that's what's so fun about this story is that Bilbo, he's symbolic of all of us. Is that he just wants to live just a normal, casual, chill life, nothing too crazy, but it doesn't really work out for him. And that's how it feels for all of us is we want things to just go smooth and be simple, but then all of a sudden a wizard shows up and then next thing we know our house is full of dwarves throwing plates.
Right. That doesn't sound so bad. I mean, compared to some of the things that come up in our lives that
Right.
throw us off on a new course, throwing plates sounds pretty good in comparison, but
That's true. Although it is symbolic. So
yes,
there's
and that's I'm excited to get into that, Caleb, because as we talked about before, the Hobbit illustrates one of the things I love about classics, and that there's so much to talk about. Even if you didn't like it, you can talk to somebody that did, and when you hear their insights, you go, "Oh wow, gee, I missed all that. I think
right.
I'd like to read it again." And I admit that's kind of how I felt about The Hobbit. I read it and I'm like, "Oh, I don't know what we're going to talk about on the podcast." And then so I talked to you. I said, "Oh, I tried to be casual because I know you like it. I didn't want to be a
Yeah.
downer. Be like, I hate it." And
Right.
so I'm like, "So what are your thoughts, Caleb? Just, prime the pump for me." And you had all these ideas, which we're going to explore here for our listeners. But I was like, wow, I missed a lot of great stuff in this book. And, that's kind of what I hope that our podcast can be for people, that they come and they listen to a book that they already love and get more insights or just go, yeah, that's what I was thinking too, get some validation, whatever. Sometimes when you love something, it's just fun to share it, right? Or say there's a book
Absolutely.
they don't like and they go, I don't get why this is a classic. Please explain it to me. Then I hope they come away from our podcast going, oh, I think I need to reread that. That sounds pretty cool after all. So that's kind of, you really helped me with that with The Hobbit. I have a better appreciation after talking to you. And I hope that our listeners are going to enjoy your commentary and whatever I might find to say.
Right. Good. Our co-commentary.
Yes, yes, I'm going to contribute something. So, anyway, so let's start with you, Caleb. Why don't you go ahead with the part about how Bilbo, expand a little more about how Bilbo is all of us and how
Yeah.
those throwing plates is symbolic?
Right. So I think the best way to describe it is to just start from the beginning. In the beginning, it talks about how um, that once there was a hobbit who lived in a hole, and not just any ordinary hole, but it's a nice hole, you know? And and now but and now right there though, right up in the front, in the first paragraph, there's symbolism there too, that he lives in a hole. And now a hole is confined. And even though he lives in a luxurious hole, it's still a hole because it's apart from the world. It's somewhere
Mhm.
secluded. It's like you're trying to, it's like the phrase that the ostrich putting his head in the sand is that when you live in a hole, you're living under a rock. You're not experiencing the world around you. And so Bilbo, he's living in a hole and he's just relaxing there. He's just chilling and along with the other hobbits. That's just how hobbits are, is they're a casual folk that they just like to live the simple life. They're farmers. They like to stay on the farm. They like to do not much. And that's they like it that way.
I love them.
Right? Just chill. And at least in the books and in the movies, a lot of the hobbits are big on pipe weed, which, is just another thing that shows that they just like to be relaxed. And so they live their kind of relaxed life. They have their pipe weed, so they're extra relaxed, all while they're living in a hole in the ground. And they're happy that way. And so I think that that's the first little bit of symbolism is that there's a part of all of us that we would like that. We would like that simple life where things are just kind of simple, confined, we're comfortable. There's
No
a part of us that likes
surprises,
it. Exactly.
right?
No surprises, no unneeded stress, no crazy worries. You don't need to worry about how you're going to pay the bills, and just things are just smooth.
And
There's
everything under control, right? Got
absolutely
everything under control.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but then in life, then that just doesn't work like that because Bilbo, he's got everything under control. He's home and he's doing well. And then all of a sudden, this random wandering wizard shows up and starts talking to him. And Bilbo, being friendly, he tells him good morning and they have a little conversation. And then, but then the wizard kind of persists and starts insisting that maybe he should go on this adventure. And then Bilbo's like, on second thought, good morning. And this time he means good morning as goodbye. And
See yourself out the door. Thank you.
right. We don't need any adventures here. Not in Baggend. Yep, not in the Shire. So, but the wizard insists and persists, and then ultimately he leaves. But he does tell this troop of dwarves that he found them a nice burglar to help them on their adventures, which is of course not what Bilbo's all about.
It's certainly not anything Bilbo agreed to.
Right. And so what Bilbo agreed to was to allow the wizard to come back and have tea the next day. Just simple. He's like, okay, well, I don't know about any sort of adventure, but I'm a good person. I can invite someone over for tea and we can just visit. Simple. In my hobbit hole, under my terms, no big deal. And if they get kind of rowdy, I'll kick them out. It's okay. And so imagine his surprise when he hears a knock on the door, and I think he even kind of forgot a little bit about it. So he was hurrying to get the kettle on, and then he goes to open the door, and there's just a stout little dwarf standing there, and he's like, "What? Who? Wait a minute!"
This is a strange week.
Right. And so then he invites him in because he's a friendly host, and then time after time after time, more dwarves just keep on showing up until all of a sudden, oh, there's 13 dwarves in his house. I believe it's 13. And then Gandalf shows up, the wandering wizard, which just as a little side note, um, J.R. Tolkien, he was really big on um, Norse mythology. And so Gandalf is kind of an archetype of Odin because Odin is kind of the god of wisdom in Norse mythology. And he would actually often take a disguise of a man in a gray cloak and a gray hat. And basically, he was a wandering wizard. And so Gandalf is symbolic of wisdom and power in these stories, which is why it's interesting because he's not always present. What he'll come in and out of the stories, and usually when he's most needed, but then there's sometimes where he's not there at all. And so he's an overall presence that kind of helps with the story and helps with the progression and helps with the growth of the characters, but it's not his story. He's there to push the characters along. And so that was just something I think is interesting. Um, yeah, so out of all that kind of monologue, was there anything that stood out to you? Anything that um
Oh, I really like that part about I didn't know that was like Odin, but I thought um that's so interesting how feels like somehow that times that's how God is in our lives. Sometimes you
right.
feel him there and sometimes it feels like he's gone when you need him the most. And I think he's always there, but we don't always feel it. So I
Yeah,
can certainly empathize with Bilbo when, I'm sure at times he was like, where's Gandalf? He got me into this mess. He should come
right.
help me out. And he's nowhere to be found. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
you're right. We could all relate to that.
yeah, for sure. And it's funny because Bilbo just expected to have Gandalf over for some tea. He didn't expect a whole adventure out of it. And I
For
and that's how
sure.
we are. That's sometimes we say, okay, well, I'll do this one thing because it's not a big deal. But then that one thing turns into this big this bigger situation that we weren't really prepared for. It's like for example, I used to live in Washington and then I moved to North Carolina. And even just that one trip is quite the adventure. But then it's like along the way, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And it was just crazy. And so that's in a sense, I felt kind of like Bilbo because he was like, okay, I'm gonna have tea with a stranger, and that'll be difficult.
That'll be the end of it.
Right. And I was thinking that too. I was like, okay, I'm gonna move across the country, and that's difficult. But then it was like one thing after another, and for Bilbo, it's one dwarf after another starts showing up, and then they're all in his house, and they're all wanting beer, and they're wanting meat and cakes and all these different things. And there's even one part where Bilbo gets worried because being a good host, there might not be enough cakes for him. I just thought that was a funny line. And I'm like, yeah, I can relate to that. I would hate it if I ran out of cakes.
Right. Especially since he wasn't expecting so many visitors. Clearly, those
Right.
cakes were meant to be for him in the first place. It's
Right.
like, okay, I'll share, but at least leave some for me.
Right. Exactly. And so you have Bilbo, who's kind of symbolic of all of us and the peace in life that we want to have, but also just the kind of the stagnancy, the complacency, there's the old phrase that there's how's it go? No that there's no comfort, or there's no growth in your comfort zone, and there's no comfort in your growth zone. And so Bilbo is very much in his comfort zone, not growing, not really ambitious, but he does have the Took side in him and the Baggins side. Those are the two different families. And so the Took side of him is the adventurous side, the side that sees this random Gandalf and says, I will be a friend and I'll invite him in, even though it's kind of out of the normal. And the Baggins side is like, yeah, no, nope, we don't need anything different in our lives. And so then as the story progresses, then it's that battle between the adventurous side of him and the I just wish I had stayed home side. And that's very normal, and that's fine. It's just that's how all of us are, is that we have, in a sense, two different sides of us where when things get tough, we're like, okay, the growth is good. We can keep on going. And then there's a side that's like, the comfort is also nice. I wish I had never started this. I wish I could have just stayed back where I was in the beginning.
I've certainly felt that with those unplanned adventures, right?
Right.
But also even with planned adventures, sometimes when I go on vacation and you think it's vacation, everything's going to be wonderful. But sometimes, there's snafus and things that go wrong. And I think, what have I gotten myself into?
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah. And so
can't get away from that.
yeah, even the best of planning just doesn't work out sometimes. And so for Bilbo, when the dwarves show up, they start talking all about how they're gonna go back to their mountain, which is just forever away, and they have to go and say and rescue the mountain, and they have to kick out the dragon. And Bilbo's like, okay, well, why are you guys discussing this at my house? And then it starts to be implied that he's the 15th member of the party, and that he's going to be the burglar that's really in charge of getting the gold from the dragon. And he's like, wait a minute, who signed me up for this? And so the bag inside of him is panicking and freaking out. But then, the Took side of him says, wait a second, no, this is a challenge. I can do this. And on top of that, there's this little intercourse and dialogue that they have where the dwarves, they start to talk about how dangerous it can be. And so Bilbo, he's there, and he's like panicking because he's like, well, I can't kick him out, but they're expecting me to go with them, and do I need to go with them? And so he says that he feels a shriek building up him, and so at one point he ends up screaming. And so then the dwarves, they kind of make fun of him for that. And so then his pride is wounded. He's like, okay, hold on. Nope. And so he starts posturing, and he says, well, I don't know anything about all this, and I don't know why you guys are here. I didn't sign up for this, but you're here anyway. So I'm gonna be a macho man basically and just say, okay, well, let's do it.
I'm as good as any old dwarf.
Right. And and so and so he starts listening, and that's when he kind of starts to be more invested the in the adventure, because he's like, okay, well, I now I have to look cool in front of these dwarves, you know? And so as the day goes on, and there's now to, I guess, to this the symbolism of the throwing of the plates. Um I don't know exactly what you could say the symbolism is. Maybe someone else will see it differently than I do. But what I think of it as is that Bilbo's life is being not only turned upside down, but thrown around. Is that everything that he
Um,
kind of holds precious to him is now in the hands of other people and being tossed around, and it's fragile. So all the things that they're throwing is
oh,
fragile. So um they're crack the or bend the knife or dent what is it bend the knives and crack the plates, and so everything he has is just kind of being misused, and it's like I said, it's all fragile. And so as the plates are flying through the air, then he's nervous because there's so many pieces of his life that are now out of control. But there's an interesting thing that happens, which is, as out of control as everything actually ends up being cleaned and put away. And so, from all of the chaos that the dwarves caused, of first of all eating basically all of his food, and then making all of his dishes dirty, and then throwing everything all around the house, and that once everything kind of calms down, it's peaceful and things are cleaned and put away. And so from chaos, it came this kind of unique and precious order that he was looking for, which is, I think, kind of a symbol for, in a sense, the whole story. Is that throughout the story, things are always up in the air and flying around and going crazy, and everything's at risk of breaking, the risk of dying. There's so many things going on, but then throughout the story and up until the end, you see that everything actually miraculously does get cleaned and put away properly. And so I think that's kind of an interesting little foreshadowing for the entirety of the book, personally.
oh, I like that. I like that. You know, it reminds me of, obviously, I'm not a person that works out a lot, but that's what I guess makes this analogy more meaningful for me is like, say you go to the gym and you're working with a trainer and they're pushing you beyond where you would push yourself, which is the whole point of having a trainer, as I understand it, right?
Right.
But you're like, ow, ow, ow. This hurts. I'm
Hmm.
sure it's not supposed to hurt this bad. And they're
Right.
like, oh yeah, no pain, no gain. This is what you need. You know what I mean? Like, are you sure something's not going to break and we're not going to be able to fix it? I'm not going to
Right.
get some kind of sports injury from my very first workout at the gym,
Uh-huh.
right? And yet you do it. And then later, after you recover, you come back and you're stronger and you can do more, right? Same
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And so,
That's how I relate to the idea of the breaking plates, you know, like physical, like, are you sure this is recoverable?
right. Right. And exactly. And so Bilbo's going through all this growth, and he sees, it's like a visual demonstration of growth, because there's a lot of risk, and there's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of change, and there's a lot of lack of control, and a lot of pain in many places, because without the pain, there's no gain. Without the lack of control, there's no growth. And so I think that that's my personal symbolism for the throwing plates in
I
the
like
Hobbit
it.
hole. And and what ends up happening is, then the dwarves, they all sing songs and they discuss more, but then as the night kind of goes on, then everyone goes to sleep, and Bilbo wakes up in the morning and he sees that everything's cleaned, and he starts to think, wait a minute, did I dream everything? Weren't there dwarves in my house? And everything's back to kind of the way it was. And but at the same time, he's looking around. He does see that things are different, and so he's like, okay, no, they were here, but I'm pretty sure I told him that I would go. But then now that they're not there, he's like, well, they left, and I guess that's okay. So he starts to just kind of tidy up the house and then just kind of puts the day past him and like that was a crazy day. And then Gandalf comes back and he's like, what's taking you so long? They're waiting for you out by the edge of the town. And Bilbo's like,
How's he supposed to know that?
he's like, what? Who? No one told me. No one left to know. And Gandalf's like, oh, you must not have been in proper order or not doing your usual routine because we left a note right on the mantelpiece. And Bill was like, what? You did? Oh, well. And so then now he's embarrassed because they didn't just leave him. They're expecting him and he's late. And so now he's not only invested, now he's put a bad foot forward. And so now he's like, okay, well, and so it's an interesting dilemma of that he started out by being nervous about joining at all. And then he was like, okay, well, and I guess what you could also use this as an example of is an example of a lie. So he starts off by trying to tell the truth, like, hey, I'm not a burglar. I shouldn't be here. But then but then his pride is hurt, and so he says, you know what? Fine, I am a burglar. And so he sparks that little lie, and then now the lies kind of got away from him. And now they're expecting him to show up and they're waiting for him. And then he gets put into all these crazy situations because he's pretending to be something that he isn't. And so it's a I know it's kind of a I guess a dichotomy, a flip, a contrasting, we'll call it a contrasting example of lying and growth. I don't think that growth always has to do with lying. In fact, I think most of the time it shouldn't have to do with lying. But it is an interesting similarity that Bilbo in the story is lying about being a burglar, and that's what causes him to find this growth. But that doesn't mean you have to lie to go on adventures. The main thing is that he he took advantage of an opportunity. He said, "Okay, well, I'm not a burglar, but maybe I could be, you know?" And
Yeah.
so it's his story of growth, not because he's lying about it, even though he is, but the story of growth is because he's taken an opportunity to be something that he wasn't before.
Well, and he's not like he didn't set out with the intention to lie. He's not like a con man or something.
Right.
He was kind of pushed into that scenario. I mean,
Right.
granted, part of it was like his pride, but I guess, I've had plenty of those prideful moments, so I have sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Like, let's cut Bilbo a break here, okay? The dwarfs were making fun of him. What was he
Right.
supposed to do?
Right. And Gandalf, the wandering wizard, the authority figure, was like, yeah, he can do it. He's a burglar. And so
He's
then
like, okay,
and so
I'll be a
now
burglar.
right, so now Bill was like, well, do I have to say that he's a liar? I don't want to call him a liar. So he's like, okay, I guess I am. And there's some truth to it because hobbits, they are very sneaky because they have large feet or whatever the reasoning is. They are really good at sneaking, and so he would make a decent burglar. And so he's like, you know what? Okay.
Theoretically.
Right, right. In theory, he's like, okay, in theory, I could be a burglar, so why not? And it's also the group think. That's a good psychological term we can throw in here.
I love learning about groupthink. So tell us some more about that, Caleb.
Right. So it's kind of a double. So we've got groupthink, but we also have a little bit of conformity and a little bit of the Stanley Milgram experiment. So
Oh, I really love that one.
yeah,
Carry on.
you want to give a do you have a good quick recap of the Stanley Milgram experience, or would
Oh,
you like me to do it?
oh no, I'll be happy to do it. Because I'm very interested in the Stanley Milgram and the Stanford prison. I mean, who
Right.
isn't?
Right.
Right? If you like psychology, anyway. So the Stanley Milgram experiment, they set out to try and understand what happened in Germany. Why did so many people follow along with the Nazis? What went wrong? And so they set up this experiment to to test their hypothesis, right?
Right.
And so where the people in the study would come in and they'd like be sitting in the lobby with another person. What they didn't realize what the other person was part of the experiment. Okay,
Hmm.
but the one person didn't know that. So the some guy in a white lab coat would come out and say, "Oh, we're testing people's tolerance to pain. So we're going to have one of you go in a room and we're going to hook up electrodes to you, and this other person's going to read words to you or something like that, some little test, and you have to
Right.
say back the group of words. And if you get it wrong, we're going to give you a shock." Right.
Hmm.
And so they go, okay, and they take them back. And the person that the test subject ends up being the one that's reading the words to the other person and giving the shocks, who they think is just another volunteer like they are.
Right.
Right. And as the thing goes along, the guy in the white coat representing authority keeps telling him, "Oh, turn up the shock level." And meanwhile, the guy who's being shocked starts crying out, "Oh, oh, oh, ah," making these horrible sounds.
Hmm.
And the person wants to stop, and the white coat authority figure says, "Nope, nope, you got to keep going." And most of them kept going. Some of them went alarmingly high, like to what would have been dangerous levels. Fortunately,
Right.
it was all fake, and the other person wasn't really being shocked. And so, this experiment has been criticized, understandably, for being unethical, especially by
Right.
today's standards. But I'm actually unethical or not. I'm glad they did it because I think it was
Yeah.
fascinating. I guess I wouldn't say that if I had participated in the study and, shocked someone to an unreasonable level because an authority figure told me to, then I'd probably be pretty mad too. But I
Right.
think that we learn a lot about human nature through that experiment. So I think it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And Dr.
Hmm.
Zimbardo, is that his name? Yeah, that
I
did
think so.
the Stanford prison experiment.
Right.
He wrote a really great book if people are interested. Just look up Phil Zimbardo and something about why people do bad things. It was a really interesting book. And he talked a little bit about that and about his experiments with the Stanford prison experiment and how, he admitted even he got caught up in it. So it could happen to anybody. Even the guy that designed the study got caught up in it. That's
Right.
how powerful groupthink is. So, now take it away,
Right.
Caleb.
Yeah. And now, and so that's a great synopsis of all of that. And now let me explain how that relates to poor Bilbo. So Bilbo, he is the test subject. He's the person that comes in and is like, and he sees the man in the white lab coat, but in this case, it's a man in a gray robe and a gray pointed hat who is a wizard. So, and then all of the dwarves are kind of like the person that he's administering the shocks to, or the person that is the actor in this situation. And so what happens is Gandalf comes in and says, "Okay, now you're a burglar." And Bilbo says, "Wait, I'm not a burglar." But then as the dwarves, they kind of start to they in a sense they start to kind of talk and they start to shock and it's almost like that, like they're getting shocks when Bilbo is wrong. And so then but then Gandalf tells Bilbo, "No, you have to be the burglar in this situation." And so now Bilbo is having this authority figure tell him that you've got to do this. And so now Bilbo's like, "Oh, well, I guess I really need to do it because the authority figure is telling me to do it, even though it seems to be causing these other people discomfort, thinking because they're like, wait, you expect us to take this guy? He's going to get us all killed." And so in a sense, they're getting discomfort from the fact that Bilbo is being expected to be a burglar. But the authority figure keeps on telling Bilbo to be the burglar. And so Bilbo, just like I think it was about 75% of people, he just says, "Okay, you know what? The authority figure said, let's do it. So we'll do it." Which is another example of how I think Bilbo, at least in the beginning of this story, he's not a hero figure. He's an average person. He's just an average person that just kind of went along with the story and it got away from him. What makes him the hero of the story is that he doesn't back out. He doesn't say, "Okay, I'm done. I'm going home." But instead he says, "You know what? I started this. I'm going to see it through to the end." And then and so that's an example of how the the Milgram experiment applies. But then the group think of it is that if Bilbo was just sitting in his house and someone came and told him to be a burglar, he wouldn't have done it. But since he was in this group, and they were, some of them were expecting him to do it, and some of them were thinking he's crazy, and then the authority figure is pushing him. Then now there's a big group expecting something of him, and so he's all of a sudden he's like, wait a minute, okay, well, if everyone's wanting me to do this, then I guess I should. And so that's the groupthink side of it, is that when there are more people in a group, then you kind of lose that sense of um, individualization. And so he just becomes one of the group. He wants to be part of the group. He wants to be with the cool kids, even though they're not really doing something that he's interested in, but he doesn't want to be shunned. He doesn't want to be left outside of the group. And so he's like, okay, well, I guess I gotta do what they're doing. And if they're burglars, then now I'm a burglar. So I think that that's part of the psychology of why Bilbo goes with this crazy adventure.
I love that. I think that's a really great explanation because otherwise, why would he leave his comfortable, like you said, his comfortable little hole and his
Right.
comfortable life and there's got to be some reason that pushed him out. And he's not even like taking friends with him or people he's comfortable with.
Right.
He's going out with these dwarves that were just yesterday strangers to him, and now he's going on an adventure, you know.
Yeah. And so
So,
and so he and then, like we said, he wakes up and everyone's left, and then all of a sudden he finds out that he's late. And so he has to pack hurriedly, and he runs out there, and he sees everybody, and he gets there just in time when they're about to leave him, because they're like, well, I guess he gave up. But he makes it. And then but it's funny because he's like, oh no, wait, we can't do this. I have to go back. I forgot my handkerchief. And they laugh at him, and I think one of them tears off a piece of his shirt and throws it at him. Like, there you go, handkerchief. And that's just it's kind of like that final like example of, you're leaving the comforts of home behind. And this is where you start to grow. You no longer have a nice pristine cloth to wipe your face with. You now have to use a torn off piece of a dwarf shirt. And which is also symbolic of the fact that his life has just changed. He doesn't have nice fancy things anymore. Now he's poor. Now he's a traveler, he's an adventurer. He doesn't know where he's going to sleep each night. Now things are out of his control. If he wanted things to be in his control still, that was his last attempt to take things back, is to go back home and get his handkerchief, because he can control that. But then that's taken away too, because now he's using a piece of a dwarf shirt, out of his control. So
yeah.
there's all
And
these fun examples.
I love that. I didn't even think about that, shirt, the handkerchief thing, but that really makes sense how, you know, he's leaving something comfortable and going to the unknown. And the handkerchief was like a last, like, wait, I'm not sure I want to do this.
Right.
And that was just kind of taken away.
Right.
And we're off, you
His
know?
opportunity to go back, to take some comfort. And then it's taken, because that's how adventures and that's how growth works. And and so I
No
think,
pain, no gain, right?
right, exactly. And now he's got the pain. And we'll see in this story as he slowly starts to get some gain from all the pain he goes through. But we'll start with some pain. So throughout the beginning of the story, especially, Bilbo is trying to be a burglar, and he's really bad at it because he's not a burglar. He's kind of sneaky, but he's not a burglar. And you see this in the example of the trolls, which is, I think, my favorite part of the book. And it was my favorite when I was a kid, for sure. And so you've got the dwarves, and you've got Bilbo and Gandalf, and they're all adventuring. And now this doesn't mean that they're stopping at hotels along the way. They're camping out. And when it rains, they have to keep on moving, and so some nights they're wet and cold, and they can only pack so much food. And it's not like there's just a gas station every now and then you can stop at. And so at this point in this story, when they meet the trolls, they're starting to run out of food. And so they're getting kind of desperate. They're all hungry. It has been raining off and on. And so they're cold. A lot of their supplies are wet. And so tensions are high. Bilbo is missing home more than anything. And but at the same time, he's also got a little bit of the sunk cost. He he starts to think, well, I've already gone this far. I might as well just keep on going. And so the farther he goes, then the more he's almost obligated to see it through. And so he's like, okay, well, I already made it through a few rainy nights. What's one more? And then all of a sudden, they're they're like running out of food and they're cold and they can't start a fire. But then they do see a fire off in the distance, but it's unknown territory. It's dangerous. And so they're all kind of nervous and they know that if a party of 14 dwarves, because Gandalf had left to do some wizard thing, that they know if a party of 14 dwarves show up, then it could startle them and it could cause a fight. It could cause all kinds of bad things. And so they decide to have Bilbo go because he's the burglar anyways. And so he might as well be the one to go and to
Go
scout
burgle.
it out. Right. So go, if you need to take something, go take something, or at least go say hi, just see what's going on. And so Bilbo, he's obviously nervous because he's like, well, he's like, I'm just a hobbit. He's like, I don't do this. I'm not a burglar. But he's like, okay, well, I am now. So he begrudgingly goes. But I think there's a part of him that also is like, okay, this is my chance to really see if I should be here. And so he goes and he sneaks up and he sees that it's not just people or something, but it's these big, scary trolls. And they're all sitting around this fire, but they do have food. And so he starts to think, okay, well, I don't know what we do. He's like, okay, well, I've done what I was supposed to. I went, I saw who's at the fire. Now I should go back. But then the burglar part, the Took part, it kind of creeps in and he says, well, you know what? If I'm playing this role of the burglar, I suppose I should burgle. And so he goes and he sneaks up and he tries to take one of the trolls' purses or basically their wallet, I guess. And
That's very brave.
right, yeah, I wouldn't do that. But then again, would I? You know, that's kind of the fun thing about this story is if you put yourself in this situation, would you do what Bilbo does? If you were expected to be the burglar, then would you? You know, after you've already traveled through this forest and you've been brought along all this time, would you want to actually earn your place? Would you want the other 13 people in your group to not think you're totally worthless? And so would you say, you know what? I suppose that this is my job and I don't feel comfortable with it, but I'm going to do it. And here we go. And so I think that's part of the interesting thing is how far is someone willing to go when they're expected to? You know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking of it's a could be a combination of how, we all want to fit in and be part of the group. So he wants
Mm-hmm.
to be the burglar like he's expected to be. Also related to what you're saying earlier about the sunk cost. I mean, he left his comfortable hole, he's camping out on the ground for what? To do this, to be a burglar.
Right.
So if I don't do this, then I've left my hobbit hole for nothing.
Yeah.
Just got to do it, you know? And
Right.
that said, I'm still not sure if I would do it. I feel like I'm a chicken. But I hope, I mean, if Bilbo could come out of his shell and do it, maybe I could do it too.
Well, see
That's one
that's
of the
part of
great
the
things about
story.
hobbits.
Right. Well, and that's part of what makes this a great story is that it allows us to have those questions. And that's what makes Bilbo kind of the hero in the story is that he's us. But he's us if we were a little more brave, even though we're not experienced. And so he's us if we were willing to dare, you know, if we were willing to take the risks, if we were willing to go out on a limb and take a chance. And so and you know, often it doesn't work out. Like for Bilbo, he took this risk, he tried to be a burglar, he tried to take the wallet, and I always get confused about this part, but I'm pretty sure what happens is that the wallet is like enchanted, and so the wallet speaks when he tries to take it. And so it basically like sets off an alarm. And so the troll notices that someone's stealing his wallet. And so he grabs Bilbo, and now Bilbo's caught. He's caught by this big troll who is totally planning to eat him. And he's like, okay, well, that's what I get for trying to be something that I wasn't. And it's just funny because then you have Bilbo and the troll looking at him, and the troll says, "Ooh, what is this? Where did you come from? What are you?" And Bilbo, being inexperienced and new and nervous and scared, he starts to say that he's a burglar, but then halfway through realizes what a dumb thing that is to say. You don't just say, "Oh, well, I'm trying to rob you." So he says, "I'm a hobbit," but then
I'm a hobbit,
I'm
a
a
hobbit.
right, and then but then trolls, not being super smart, they're like, "What is a hobbit?" And and then another troll asks, "And are there more of them?" And then the other troll asks, "And can we cook him?" And so now Bilbo's like, "Okay, well, great. Now not only am I and now not only am I like a bad burglar, I'm about to be eaten." And
And potentially endanger my friends because maybe the trolls are going to go look and see if there's more
right,
burr hobbits in the vicinity.
right, which is actually true because then they ask him, Are there more of you?" And Bilbo, he starts to be like, "Well, yes, there's a lot. There's a lot.
I mean, no.
None at all." And then one of the trolls is like, "What do you mean by lots? None at all?" And so it just shows how
Poor
Bilbo is
Bilbo.
trying, and but he's like in this weird issue where he's like trying to be honest because he seems like a good honest fellow, but then he realizes that sometimes when you're on an adventure that maybe you don't need to be as honest about everything, because if he was to tell him the truth that yes, he's being a burglar and he came to rob them, he's getting eaten right there, no question. And then if he tells him that there's a lot of other dwarves out there, then they're going to go and eat his friends. And so now he's in this interesting predicament where he's fighting against his own nature, but also nervous. And so then, and he's having this battle and losing. He's just losing.
Poor
But
Bilbo.
then,
Everything about this story is pushing him out of his own nature.
right. And that's the great part of it is that you see Bilbo and he tries these things and fails. And he tries to be the hero and gets caught. He tries to be the hero and now he's going to get eaten. He tries to be the hero and now he almost gets all of his friends eaten. And that's how it is sometimes. Sometimes when we try something that's new to us, it doesn't work out. And I think that's what's really great about this part of the story is that he doesn't go and steal the purse and then go back and be the hero. He's the goober that got everybody caught. Because then the dwarves come in and they try to save him, and in turn they all end up getting captured, except for Bilbo, ironically. So now Bilbo is kind of free, hiding in the bushes, not sure what to do, and all the dwarves are just in all tied up, and the trolls are trying to decide what to do with them and how to eat them. What's the best way to eat them? When all of a
The best
sudden,
way to cook them.
right, exactly, and then when all of a sudden a voice comes out, and if you've seen the movies, no, it's not Bilbo. Bilbo doesn't save the dwarves. Gandalf is the one who comes and he says, and he starts the dwarves or the trolls arguing about if they should bake them or if they should skin them and peel them first, or if they should boil them alive, or if they should just sit on them and squash them into jelly. And and Gandalf gets them to be arguing so long that the sun comes up and the trolls are turned to stone. And so they're saved by the wandering wizard who left, but then came back when he was most needed. And now, and it's funny because in the movie they have Bilbo take that role of making the trolls argue, because I think in the movie they want you to think that he's more heroic, especially because the movies they split it into three movies, and so and he's not very heroic honestly until until at least the latter half of the story. Because in the beginning half, he's still average. He's still just a normal person, but I guess he's a little above average because he does try. He does say, okay, I'm going to try to actually do this. but he's not good at it. And so now he's like gone on this trip and he tried to be a burglar and he almost got all of his friends eaten. And so now he's feeling pretty miserable. And sometimes that's just how life goes. Is sometimes we try to do all these cool things and they just don't work out. And sometimes life gets worse because of us trying new things.
You know, that reminds me, one time there was something wrong with the, I don't know, light or something, and had
Hmm.
asked your dad to fix it. And he was taking longer than I thought he should. So I was like, I'll just do it myself. Of course,
Right.
I had no clue what I was doing. So I just go with my little screwdriver and start trying to take the light switch apart. And I think I pulled the plastic part off. That was easy, right? But when you get into the inside, pretty soon, you know what happened, right? All the power goes out because it flipped the circuit breaker. And I was like, oh my word, now I've made
Right.
it worse. And then, I beat myself up because, oh no, this terrible. But actually, that turned out to be a good thing because your dad came home and he fixed it properly. And then ever since then, these many years, when I'm afraid, when I feel like he's taking so long to do something, I just say, oh, honey, I know you're busy. It's okay. I'll fix it. And he goes, no, never mind. I'll do it.
That's funny.
So, so that's just it's a silly example, but sometimes we do undertake to do a new thing for whatever reason, and our first efforts don't turn out well, but that doesn't mean we failed. It just gotta keep going, right? You know,
Right.
poor Bilbo. His first attempt to be a burglar was a smashing failure. But
Yes.
I think for a minute we should talk about the trolls. Do you have any
Yeah.
psychology about the trolls?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So I think trolls, I would say that they just kind of represent I think in general they just kind of represent like things that are not good. Like you could make all kinds of different assertions for what they could be. It could be gluttony, it could be greed, it could be violence. There's all kinds of different things that they could represent. Um, I'm not exactly sure that I would choose one in particular because they're kind of a amalgamation of all of them because they they just eat all kinds of things that they really shouldn't. So that's kind of gluttony. They steal
Yeah,
and they
I like
take
that.
things, and as they take things from people that they will probably eat, then they store it and stash it away, why which is where Bilbo gets his elvish sword Sting, and where Gandalf gets his sword. So they took all these really precious treasures and just stored it in a cave. So greed, they represent greed, violence, obviously, and I suppose the only thing, and I guess they could represent lust too because they like to take things that are attractive. So, so yeah, I think trolls in a sense are a representation of the kind of the negative things in life that you could say the seven deadly sins even. And so I guess you could say that maybe Bilbo, when he was trying to steal from the trolls, he was trying to prove that um, maybe that he's better than these seven deadly sins. But then he ends up getting too close and he gets caught.
Getting caught up. Yeah,
Hmm.
I like that.
And it's kind of like the story of Icarus when Icarus he was in Greek mythology. Then his dad they were trying to escape from a prison, and so his dad made these wings, and the wings, the wax, it was kind of temperamental. So the dad tells Icarus, his son, he says, "Okay, now don't fly too close to the sun, because or else the wax will get too hot and melt, and don't get too close to the water, or else it'll get wet and fall apart." And so, but then Icarus, he's so excited because the wings are working, and so he's having so much fun flying that he ends up getting a little bit too close to the water, and then the wings get a little bit wet, and then he overcorrects and he tries to go up, and he gets too close to the sun, and then the wings melt, and he ends up dying. Um, but he's saved in the Greek mythology sort of way, and how they often do. But it's an example of how sometimes we get a little bit overambitious and we have some overconfidence, and we think we can do something that maybe we should have just not touched at all. We should have said, you know what, that's not something I can handle. And so if we're taking this example, then perhaps Bilbo, he should have seen those sins and said, you know what? I can't, I shouldn't be near those. I shouldn't touch them. But he said, I want to look cool in front of my friends. And so, in a sense, you could say he gave into peer pressure, maybe. And so maybe he did drugs, you know. I don't know. You could take that and mean all kinds of different things. And then then the only thing that could save them in the end was God, Odin, or God, or because Odin, he it's funny, Odin in a lot of sense cases represents not only just a general God, but he's also kind of symbolic of Christian God sometimes, because it's interesting because Odin was actually hung on a tree for a certain amount of days to gain wisdom. And that's the same way that Jesus was on a cross and he gained wisdom and was able to atone for the sins of the world. And so when you have Bilbo and the dwarves get caught up in this sticky situation of sin that they got themselves into, they couldn't get out of it. But the only person that could get them out was Gandalf. Or maybe if it's us, then we get stuck in these sticky situations, and the only person that can get us out of them is God. And I don't know. So that's an interesting. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to interpret it, but that's the way I'm choosing to interpret it right now.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, thanks for asking. That was, and that's what's so fun about classics is that I never would have really elaborated on the trolls like that if it wasn't for classics and if it wasn't for this podcast. So
Right.
hopefully anyone listening is enjoying this and maybe thinking, oh, I don't know if I believe it like that. I think of it like this. If you do, then comment below or whatever. Let us know because I'd love
And
to hear more
and
theories.
that's what makes it interesting. Different possibilities, interpretations, and just expands your mind, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that.
And
So much more than, yeah, I like that part too.
right. Yeah, it was a cool story. Yeah.
I mean,
'Cause-
don't get me wrong. I also read those books that,
right.
not a lot of great discussion comes from them, but they're still entertaining. There's nothing wrong
Yes.
with that. But I'm just saying I love classics because there's so much more to discuss, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so we'll keep on going. And so now Bilbo, his first attempt was a failure. And so that's a bummer. He's like, okay, well, I thought I could be a burglar, but it didn't really work out. And so now I bet he's kind of kicking himself. So now this comes to the point in our lives where we try something and there's two options. You could say there's more, but for now we'll say there's two options. There's either you try again, you use that time when it didn't work out and you say, okay, I've got to I got to do better next time. Next time that comes up, I'm going to do better. Or there's the other option, which is, okay, it's not for me, and you give up. But Bilbo, what makes him the hero of the story is that he doesn't give up. He doesn't say, okay, well, I guess I just wasn't a burglar. I should just go home. He says, okay, well, I'm still on this journey, and next time I get an opportunity, I'm gonna try and do better. And that's what we can all
You
learn from Bilbo.
Can I interject something?
Absolutely.
My favorite story of that, my friend's dad, I would like to give him credit, but I can't remember his name, because my friend's dad. Anyway, he came from a school education where he just didn't get a very good education. It was a small school, and they really didn't teach them the fundamentals very well. And later, he decided that he wanted to be a physicist of all
Mhm.
things, right? So he starts going to school and he fails his first math class. Most of us would be like, oh, well, see, I guess I'm not cut out to be a physicist. I can't even do math. But he didn't do that. He just took the class again
Hmm.
and passed. And they took the next math class and failed.
Oh
So he took
man.
it again. And he just kept going. He failed many classes and just kept
Wow.
taking them again. And he became a physicist. I'm
Hmm.
just so impressed by him, his fortitude, where
Yeah.
most of us would have said, oh, I guess I just can't be a physicist. He
Right. It's
never
not
said
for
that.
me.
He
Yeah.
just took it again. And so what I take for that is that sometimes it just takes, you might need a little bit longer to learn something. But if you really want to learn it, you can, if you're willing to put in the
Right.
work. And so Bilbo, he's the same way. He didn't, he didn't give up and go home, you know? That's admirable right there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that example because that's a very real thing is that in all of our lives. And sometimes we take tests and then we fail and you could either say, okay, it's not for me, or you say, okay, well, I can do better next time. And
Yeah.
so we
Failing
can,
doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you're going to need a little more time to learn it.
right. Just because you get caught by the troll doesn't mean that you're not a burglar. It just means that you
Right.
maybe you got a little too ambitious.
Right.
You just need a little more practice burglaring. So, but yes. And so now as the story progresses and they end up getting to um, Rivendell and they see the elves. And I guess there's probably a lot of stuff we could talk about with the elves, but I don't really have anything off the top of my head except for maybe that they're an example of sometimes along the journey there are peaceful breaks. So it's not always death and rain. Sometimes it's sunshine and chilling with the elves and having good food and wanting to stay there for longer, but realizing that you got to keep on moving and realizing that it's kind of like when you're hiking a mountain and there's a thing called a false summit. It's where you're hiking up the mountain and you see the summit and you're like, okay, here we go. I'm almost done. And then as you get to the top of that, it's only after you get to the top that you realize, oh, this isn't the end. The end is actually still way over there. And so maybe that's what the elves were kind of like for Bilbo is that they were an opportunity for him to say, you know what? I could live with the elves. The elves are awesome. I feel comfortable. They have really good food. It's a really beautiful place. And so it was an opportunity for him to say, okay, I'm out. This is fun. I think I'll stay here at least for a while. But he says, you know what? Nope. I'm a part of this group and I told them I was gonna help
We
them out
haven't
however
finished
I
our
can.
quest, so
Right. And even though I failed the first time, maybe the next time will be better. And so he goes on and they leave the elves. And like I said, I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about, and maybe some other time we will. But for now, if anyone has any things about the elves they'd like to share, comments. Because then we get to the mines and the goblins, and so all the dwarves are sleeping in this cave when Bilbo he starts to kind of feel like there's something wrong, and so he turns around and notices that a crack opens up in the cave. But because and this
creepy.
time, right, and this time Bilbo was actually helpful, minorly, but he still was able to be helpful. And so because Bilbo saw the crack, he was able to, I think he screamed, and so that was able to alert the dwarves enough that they at least knew what was coming. But more importantly, it alerted Gandalf so that Gandalf could see that there was danger coming. And so Gandalf was able to, in a sense, disappear so that they weren't able to get him, but he was able to get away so that he could actually end up saving them. And so, but unfortunately, they all get caught. They get caught by the goblins. But Bilbo, I think one of the goblins ends up like dropping him. Um,
Yeah, I think that was it.
or is it later? I think they drop him later because first they go and I think they're all together and they're taken to the Goblin King, um, which I suppose is another example of you could talk about how the Goblin King represents all things that are bad. But I kind of think it might be more fun to maybe talk about how the goblins and being deep in the mine and in the cave represents Bilbo hitting rock bottom. It's kind of an example of in his adventure as an example of how he realized that he's really not cut out for all this, and he gets depressed, he gets sad, he gets depressed, he gets upset, and it's just the lowest he's ever been because now he's in this cave, but not only this cave, but now he's in a mine, and then he ends up getting separated from his group. And so then not only is he in a mine, he also falls down and gets deeper and he's in complete darkness. And So you could say that this is an example of how maybe Bilbo he's feeling like he bit off more than he can chew. He's feeling depressed. He's like, what did I get myself into? I can't even go back now because now I'm stuck. I'm trapped. And I think he's starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed and panicked and just kind of feel like the world is closing in around him. And that happens. And so I don't know.
Oh,
I think
we
that
can all
that's
relate to that.
right. And so I think that's how I want to interpret the goblins, at least for Bilbo. You could say it's something different for the dwarves, but at least for Bilbo, I think it's an analogy of getting depressed when things really just are not going the way they should be.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that. And it's, something else we can all relate to because I think everybody's had that moment of discouragement when things aren't going the way you thought they would and you don't know
right.
how to fix it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And so now Bilbo, he's, like I said, he's not only in a cave and not only in a mine, but he's also in complete darkness. And so he's feeling like everything's closing in on him and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where he's going. He can't see what's happening next. Totally out of control. And you could say that this is the lowest he's ever been, physically and literally and emotionally at everything. And but this is also the turning point in the story for him. And this is where the ring comes in, and this is where Gollum comes in. And there's so many things we could talk about all of that. And we could even talk about the riddles and what those have to do. Maybe we will, but I think this for this episode we're not going to talk about the riddles because there's just so many things. And but what we will talk about is the ring. So now, for those of you who are watching, I'm wearing my Lord of the Rings shirt with the ring on it. But I so there's an interesting philosophy about the ring itself and how the ring represents um so the ring it turns you invisible but it's called a ring of power. And so I was like, okay, well, why does a ring of power talk about how it seems like the only real power it has is turns you invisible. And so like what's the benefit of that? And now I'm sure if you get into the actual Tolkien lore, then there's all kinds of different things that the ring does. But for our purposes, what we're going to talk about is how there's a sense of power, but also a sense of danger that comes from being invisible. And there's philosophy that would you be good if no one could see what you were doing? And and so that's kind of what the ring plays with for people is the ring gives people an opportunity to potentially do things without consequences. And so Gollum, when he has the ring, he's able to sneak around and kill goblins and be invisible. And so basically, he's able to do whatever he wants without the consequences because no one knows he's there. And and so then when Bilbo gets the ring, he has a similar opportunity that he's now able to do whatever he wants to or whatever he needs to without the consequences because people can't see him. And and so the ring in a sense just represents a life without consequences. But the problem is that that's impossible. That doesn't happen. And so what the ring does is it ends up corrupting people. It corrupts like Gollum. Gollum used to be at least somewhat more like a hobbit. But then if you've seen the movie or you've read the book, he just becomes this creepy little monster. But it's because he's gone his whole life, or not his whole life, but at least like decades, living a life with of basically what he thought was free of consequences, that he was trying to just get everything he wants when he wants it, but it just turned him into a little monster. And
And what a consequence. Mercy.
right. And I'm sure
No one wants to be Gollum.
yeah, absolutely. And it didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, gradual thing. It was one day maybe he just wanted to be invisible, and then the next day he was like, okay, well maybe I can do this, and then I can do this, and then after a while then he just shut himself out from society. And I think that's an example of how if we try to live a life void of consequences and we just try to take what we want, then yeah, we may feel like we have power, but it's really gonna make us a shriveled up mess, whether physically or internally or emotionally. We're just gonna be a little Gollum if we're trying to live without the consequences of our actions. So I don't know. That's one way to view the ring, and I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think there's another way? What are your thoughts?
Um, no, I really like that. I think that's interesting, the things you might do if you were invisible. Think that's an interesting idea. I also never thought about till you mentioned it. What does the ring do besides make people invisible? So
Right,
I got kind of stuck on that. Like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, what does it do? Except that the Black Riders want it for something. You know what I mean?
right.
Anyway, sorry, I got distracted on that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it is kind of confusing. I tried to do a little research on that, but maybe between episodes, maybe I'll try and do some this
We'll
coming week,
we'll
try to
figure out
figure
what
out
the
what
ring
it
does,
actually
actually.
does. Yeah. But for
Right.
now, for the
But it also,
uh-huh.
like it destroyed Gollum, this idea of being invisible. I think because he wasn't really a very good person to start with,
Right.
right? That's kind of the impression you get in the movie. It
Right.
goes from bad to worse pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But Bilbo, on the other hand, he uses the invisibility to save his life, which is not a
Right.
bad thing, right?
Right.
And then he has it for how long before, the next book when he gives it to Frodo. And
Yeah.
so I think that's just an interesting juxtaposition of what the ring did to Gollum as opposed to how it affected Bilbo.
Right.
Depends on what you do with it,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
I think that's a good example because Gollum, he took the ring and he said, okay, great, I can live a life free of consequences, so I'm going to take whatever I want. But Bilbo, he said, okay, I I have this ring and I have opportunities I can avoid the consequences. But you're right, he uses them more strategically. He uses them to save his life and he uses them to save his friends, which we'll
And not
talk
just
about
to
next
get
time.
away with stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And and that's why this is a turning point for him is that it's an opportunity for him for Bilbo to actually become a burglar, for him to actually become what he's trying to be. And you could almost say that it's because in a sense he gains the confidence. And I I, I think it's not ironic and I think it's not accidental that he gets this ring and this opportunity to live without consequences at his deepest and darkest moment. In a sense, if you were to kind of just take the ring out for a minute and pretend the ring wasn't there, and then look at the story after this point, then it goes from when Bilbo falls and he's away from the group and basically as close to dead as he can get, but he realizes, I have nothing left to lose. And so then he's able to redirect and say, you know what? I really have nothing left to lose. Well, I guess we're gonna commit to this. We're gonna keep on going. And then after this is when he really starts to actually impress the group because he ends up sneaking up on them when they all got out of the cave. And so they're all like amazed because he was able to just show up and none of them saw him and they had people on lookout. And so like, oh wow, he really must be a good burglar. And and so that's the first example of when the group really starts to see like, oh, okay, we did bring a burglar. This is pretty awesome. And so that Bilbo starts to feel good because he's like, okay, hey, I did something cool. The group they like me now. And and then as the story goes, he kind of keeps on having these moments where he keeps on impressing and going above and beyond the expectations. But I think it's because, in a sense, he's not holding himself back anymore. He realized that he doesn't have anything left to lose. And so, you know what? I'm just gonna, he says, I'm gonna be the best burglar that they've ever seen. And he does it. and we'll talk about that more next week. But is there anything that you were kind of thinking?
No, I think that's a good ending point. Just the idea that after his lowest moment, that's when things started to get better. I mean,
Right.
it's funny. It's kind of like I always think it's funny how, where do you find something? It's always in the last place you look,
Right.
because it feels like that's the last place you thought of to look, but also it's the last place because once you find it, you stop looking.
Right.
I just always think that's funny. And
Right.
so
I
Bilbo,
found it
of
in the
course, is
first place I looked, but then I just kept on looking just for kicks.
yeah, right. And so I thought it's kind of like that, like you could say after his lowest point, it got better. Well, of course, because if it did get better, that might not have been the lowest point, right?
Right.
But still, I like what you're saying that after, I just like the idea that after he was in that dark moment, because, I have had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who have been suicidal. And I know many of them go on to their lives are so much better if they can just
Hmm.
get through that dark moment in the minds. Things get so much better. And I like that that's what happened with
Interesting.
Bilbo, is that was like a real turning point for him, and things really start to improve if he can
Yeah.
just hold on through that, you know, just hold
Yeah.
on. Better days are coming, you
Yeah.
know?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. Thanks for adding that because that's true. Is that, you know, that we hit dark moments, but it's like King Solomon said, is that this too shall pass. And better things are ahead because you can't have much more of the worst moment of your life. That's just not how that
Right.
works.
And when you're in the bottom of the mines and it's dark and you can't see the way forward, then, and you're depressed, like I always tell people, depression lies. It tells you you're
Yeah.
always going to feel this way. You've always felt this way. You're never going to feel any better. It's a lie. Feelings are more like waves in the ocean. I mean, they
Hmm.
come and they go. And, this wave comes up and peaks, a tidal wave of depression, but eventually it fades away and up comes a different emotion. But
Right.
when you're depressed, you forget that you've ever felt anything else, you know? But
Yeah.
that's a lie. There are other waves, other emotions coming, and light out of the darkness,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Well, great. Yeah, I feel like this is a good spot to leave this is Bilbo and all of his friends. They just got out of the goblin mines and now this is Bilbo's is his pivot point is when he really takes control of his story. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next
In
week
the
on
next episode.
exactly. So, thank you for joining us for part 1 of Shrinking Classics and this has been The Hobbit.